This is Emily Blackshear with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Tuesday, May 11th, 2021, and I'm interviewing Dr. Paul Bowers for the Deep Roots Oklahoma Authors Oral History Project. Paul, you're an English professor at Northern Oklahoma College in Enid, author of 3 books, which include a collection of short stories and 2 poetry collections. You've also published numerous short stories in literary journals and also scholarly essays. Thank you for joining me today.
You're more than welcome. Glad to be here.
So let's start by learning a little bit about you. Could you tell me, where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was actually born in Houston, and we moved from Texas to Oklahoma when I was about 7. My dad worked in the steel industry. This was back when we had a steel industry.
Yeah.
So we moved to Sand Springs, and that's where I grew up, went to high school, not too far from Keystone Dam, around the edge of the Arkansas River. And I lived in the Tulsa area until I came to Enid in 1995 and started teaching at Phillips University, when this was still Phillips University. So.
Right. Yeah. So when you were in Sand Springs, when you were growing up, how would you describe the landscape, what you'd like to do for fun, or how would you describe Sand Springs to maybe people who've never visited before?
Sand Springs it's not so much now, but it was a very industrial town. Most of the people worked at the steel plant. I actually worked, when I first started college, I worked a night shift at a fiberglass factory in Sand Springs, as a matter of fact. And I went to school, went to classes during the day at what was then Tulsa Junior College, and then worked a night shift. But it was a very industrial town. It's not so much anymore because a lot of the heavy industry simply doesn't exist as it did back in the 70s and 80s. But I grew up actually outside of Sand Springs, and just a few miles from Keystone Dam, and I could actually walk to the Arkansas River to go fishing in the morning before I went to school. So I grew up kind of a country bumpkin, to be honest. I had like Tom Sawyer aspirations, I think, when I was a kid. Lots of time outside, lots of time fishing, lots of time camping, that sort of stuff. So.
Did you hunt?
I used to hunt like crazy. I haven't. I gave it up. I'm a vegetarian. So, but yeah, I was. My dad and I hunted a lot. We eventually owned some property in Creek County, about 45 minutes from where I grew up, and we hunted out there pretty much every season. Deer, turkey, squirrel, rabbit, just everything.
Yeah, I think with hunting, it kind of teaches you to appreciate or look at life and animals in a different sort of way. Did you ever kind of think about that? I know you said you're a vegetarian.
Well, actually, my first book of poems is entitled "The Lone Cautious Animal Life."
Right,
and
right.
A lot of the poems in there have to do with. It's always hard to come up with a theme. The book, it wasn't really written as a theme book, but there's a lot about some of the early short stories I wrote. Also, the hunting stories. So, I think kind of initiation stories. I have one short story that's very much, I can't remember the title of it anymore, but it was a kid going out hunting, but there was always I think an awareness of. Oddly enough, the sort of sanctity of life, but it was also very brutal.
Right.
And I think that combination of admiration and a kind of brutality is one of the themes I touched on in the book.
Yeah. So let's go back just a little bit to what you were talking about earlier. So you said you were born in Houston, moved to Sand Springs. Did you have grandparents that lived in the Oklahoma area, or did you have family?
We had no family whatsoever.
No family.
All of my mother and father both grew up in East Texas.
Okay.
and in the piney woods of East Texas, and all of my uncles and grandparents and cousins, they all lived in that area, generally around Nacogdoches.
Okay.
So we were the only Okies in the bunch.
Oh, wow. How was that adjusting?
Well, it was
Maybe more so for them.
it was we traveled to Texas quite a bit when I was a kid. I have 3 siblings, and we'd all pile into a van, or it used to be a station wagon, and it was a van, and we'd go down for holidays and that sort of thing. So we pretty much did that till I went to college.
Yeah. So you have 3 siblings. Where are you in the lineup?
I'm the second youngest. I have an older brother, an older sister, and a younger sister.
Oh, okay. Did you all get along? Yeah, middle child. Okay. Did you all get along and like to play together when you were little? Have any particular activities?
Well, my brother was 6 years older than I, and
okay.
my older sister is 4 years older, and my younger sister is 6 years younger.
Oh, okay.
I think there was enough of an age gap there that we all had very different interests because we grew up in very different environments. It's my brother and my brother in particular really grew up with an awareness and a pressure of the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing Vietnam on television when I was a kid, but he ended up joining the Marines like a year after the war ended. So he was gone for quite some time.
Yeah.
We didn't really, we're all very different. We all get along really well, but we're all very, very different people, very different experiences.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you liked hunting when you were younger. What else did you like to do? What other hobbies, or how would you describe yourself as a kid?
I had part of this comes from the fiction I read when I was a kid, but I had this fantasy of like going and living in the woods and that kind of thing. One of my favorite novels, and I'm going to have to look this up and read it again, is an adolescent novel called My Side of the Mountain. It's about this kid who ends up, I think he's in a plane crash or something, but he survives, and he ends up getting a hawk as a friend, and he trains this hawk. And but I really enjoyed being in the woods. I think it was being in the woods as much as the hunting, as much as anything, just being out there. I played a little Little League baseball. I actually got kicked off my Little League team because I went camping instead of going to a game. So
oh no. Well, that'll do it.
Unfortunately, the coach was our next door neighbor, so that didn't go over well either. When he came over and asked my mom for my uniform.
Oh no, busted.
Yeah, that was me though. I was not I had close friends and acquaintances, but I probably enjoyed being alone as much as engaging in group activities.
So what did you dream of becoming when you were little, or when you were young?
I don't think I had any. That's the oddest.
Yeah. Or were you just more in the moment and
I didn't think
had things you like to do?
I don't recall really thinking about having any professional aspirations or anything like that. I and part of that, oddly enough, and this is not a canned response, part of that was because I think always in the back of my mind, I thought writing, literature, because I love to read and I love to write. And I was writing long before I would have called myself a writer. So I think maybe that's one of the reasons I never thought, I had any professional ambitions at all. Which is odd.
Did you ever meet authors or writers when you were young to, because sometimes it's just a matter of seeing that it's possible?
No, I don't think I would say I don't think I met any real writers until I was in college at the University of Tulsa. Grace Noshtabai was there, that's a writer, poet named Manuel Johnson, and those were the first real writers I came in contact with. But I had, I've been writing stuff as long as I can remember. One of my earliest memories is actually writing it must have been a haiku when I was in Houston. And it was about I wish I had this, but it was about a dragonfly. And it
Oh.
must have been a classroom project, like first or second grade. And they ended up, somehow they took all these, I didn't think about all the other kids, but I know that mine was included. They took all these little poems and it must have been a mall or someplace, and they put them all under glass. And I remember my mother taking me to the mall and looking in there and seeing that poem that I'd written about
Oh, wow.
a dragonfly. So that's one of my earliest memories. But again, those are and I didn't meet real writers, but I had a lot of contact with writing because of just the books that I read. And I mean, the librarians were my superstars.
Yeah.
I love librarians, and the whole pulling the card out of the book and stamping it and putting it back in the book and all that stuff. So all the rituals of going to the library.
Yeah. So you mentioned one of your favorite books as a kid that was influential. Were there any else that really made an impression on you early on?
I remember trying to read Henry David Thoreau's Walden.
Oh, wow.
When I was waiting, and I couldn't get through it. I still have never read the entirety of Walden, as a matter of fact. But I remember it's just a few books. King of the Cats was one I remember, with it's cats, but they're talking cats. And I remember reading another one called Key to the Treasure, which is kids having to solve a mystery and that sort of stuff. But I think I read so many books, I can't remember any specifics.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They all just kind of form and inform.
Those are the ones that I remember.
How we see things.
Yeah. And of course, my mother read lots and lots to me before I could read. So.
Yeah, which is important. So you graduated from high school, and you mentioned that you went to the University of Tulsa for your undergrad degree. What did you study? English? I know you got a Bachelor of Arts.
I did. I actually started at, again, what was Tulsa Junior College. I wasn't really interested in college, to be honest. I just, like I said, I was working at a factory at the time.
Right.
I've been working as a plumber for a while. And so I went to what is now TCC, and I took some, I think it was probably in a composition class that one of my teachers, I wish I could remember her name, talked about my essays and writing. So that was, there's some recognition there. And then I somehow, I don't know how I did it, but I ended up getting into the University of Tulsa. This was before it cost an arm and a leg. Tulsa. Plus I could live at home and work and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I majored in, I think it was, at the time it was called rhetoric and writing. And I think that I was the last, I think that program actually ended the year I graduated, and now they brought back, but they have a creative writing, a robust creative writing program here. So that was what I majored in.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And then I wanted to talk about your journey just through graduate school. I mean, for someone who didn't think you necessarily wanted to go to college, you chose a really intense path with the master's and PhD. So what led you? None
of it was planned. I mean, I think that I've lived my whole life trying to see my pants. So I just, once I graduated from the University of Tulsa, I actually worked in construction with my dad for a while. We carried telephone cable. I worked in retail, which I absolutely hated. But, and I got married, and my wife was actually working at a video store, and I was working at a department store in the men's department. And we decided that we wanted to do something different. So we had a copy of the OSU catalog, and we both decided we were going to go back to school and become school teachers. That was the idea. So when I started, I was actually in the education department. But after about a year or so of that, I knew that it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I ended up back over in Laurel Hall and took some graduate classes in literature there. And that was it. I mean, that's when I probably found my vocation.
Yeah.
And my wife went on, she became an elementary teacher, and she's an elementary principal. She's been doing this in education for like 30 years now. So
Great.
But
So
that's
what
where it
kept,
all happened.
yeah, well, what kept you going? Because you, I mean, it's always ambitious, I think, finish a finish a dissertation, or actually, well, as you know, in English, a lot of people start and never finish at all, or, spend a decade trying to get it together, and they may not. And you took on a pretty challenging subject with Joyce and Darwin, and yeah,
Yeah, that was
tell me about that.
uh, my master's, actually, I focused on creative writing because
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to be there when Gordon Weaver was there.
Yeah.
And Gordon just recently passed away, as a matter of fact. But he was very influential. He was probably, I remember he called me in my office or in his office, and he said, that story, Gordon was really gruff and smoking his Camels in his office and that sort of stuff. But he talked about a story that I'd done in one of his workshops, and he says, send this off to this guy, and I can't remember what magazine it was, and he says, just tell him I told you to send it. And that was a real confirmation I thought I needed. So I actually did a collection of short stories for my master's, many of which ended up in my short story collection later. But after I started the doctoral program, I don't know exactly what happened. Like I said, I sort of follow whatever my passions are at the moment, and I had the good fortune of having extraordinarily great instructors. Elizabeth Rubgill, who's Ed Walkowitz. Ed Walkowitz is the one who really got me connected with James Joyce. And I remember going into Gordon Weaver's office and telling him that I don't want to do a creative dissertation. I want to do literature. And he said, "Oh, that's good." So that's kind of how I ended up in that. But it's just, I just loved it. I loved it. I felt, despite the intensity of the program and the anxiety of grad studies, and I don't think I've ever felt as smart in my life as I did in grad school, or I should say as sharp. I'm not nearly as sharp as I used to be, but there was just this intensity of intellectual activity and camaraderie, and I loved it. I just absolutely loved it, and I still love it. That's why I'm sitting in this office on a college campus.
Sure. Yeah. Just the energy around you, and just being with that community of people who have those same passions and interests. So I wanted to go back to your short story writing, and just talk a little bit about that, maybe just with craft. So I think with writing a short story, I feel like I've talked to several novelists in this project, and just a handful of short story writers too.
There's no money,
which it's its own, but it's a challenge, to compress a whole a world, or whatever moment you're trying to write about in 15, 20 pages, or maybe a little bit more. But what, in your opinion, makes a short story successful?
I think one of the reasons I was drawn to short fiction is the same reason I was later drawn to poetry. It's got a lyrical quality to it.
Right.
It's got a rhythmic structure, I think, that's very difficult to pull off in longer forms. I don't know that I could ever write a novel. I mean, I keep thinking, well, maybe, but I really like that. I like that succinct, to some extent minimalist, but I like that lyrical quality of short stories.
So when you're teaching writing to younger writers, do you teach short story writing to
in Intro to Creative Writing? I haven't done it in the
okay.
Don Stinson and I switch off a lot, but he's been doing that most of it. Yeah, I do teach an Intro to Creative Writing. We cover fiction, mostly fiction and poetry.
What do you think the biggest mistake is that young writers make when they're approaching their own fiction?
I think, I don't know if it's a mistake. I think it has to do with experience. I think it's typically they haven't read broadly enough in the genre. They tend to, there for a while, everything was a vampire story, and then everything was a zombie story. And I think because that's what they read, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there was a kind of narrow lane that I thought they operated out of, and much of it was just that I don't know how many of them actually read short fiction, so it's very difficult to write short stories, even though we incorporated the reading of short stories into the course. But I think it's mostly just an experience, a sense of how a story works, how to use dialogue to further the narrative and in subtle ways. I think it's the same thing that governs poetry. I think you have to have a sense of the subtlety of language, and that's just a learned thing.
Learned and practiced and all of that as well. So since we're talking about poetry, so I'm curious what led you to poetry in the sense of putting two collections together. I mean, that's a process, it's and very different from your prose.
Again, I kind of stumbled into it. I published the collection of short fiction, and I was trying to get a novel started. I had an agent. It's been so long ago I don't even remember what her name was. She probably doesn't remember me either. But we tried out some early chapters of novels, and some positive results, but nobody wanted to consider it until it was finished. And I just never finished it. So I kind of didn't do much for a couple of years. And then one summer I started writing some poems again. And I remember, like I said, the first thing I remember writing was the dragonfly haiku, if that's what it was. And I'd written some really, really, really bad poetry earlier in my life. But so I started off writing poems really with no intention of putting them in a book, which is often the case with first collections. You're just writing and writing and writing. Next thing you know, you've got enough for a book, and that's how it turned out. So again, I just kind of stumbled on it. And I probably spent a couple of years just writing poems with really no idea what I was going to do with it.
So,
and then I ended up at Scissortail. I actually been at Scissortail and read fiction, and then I went on this like 2 or 3 year gap, and then I've been writing some poems. I sent Ken Hayda some of the poems from my first collection, and he liked them. So he said, sure, come on in. So I show up and I go, this is the first Scissortail I've been to in 3 years. I've been there as a fiction writer. And he puts me on the 7:00 evening slot, which is like prime time slot.
Yeah,
I was sandwiched between Rilla Askew and Larry Thomas.
Oh boy.
And I thought, why in the world, Ken, did you put me? So anyway, he's never said anything about this, but that was a really defining moment for me, that he trusted me enough to kind of put me in that, what I saw as a kind of prime time slot. So and that was enough to sort of get the collection together and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how it came about. You always have to have help from people, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. The community is very important. And Scissortail Literary Festival at ECU and Ada, that's of course has come up a lot in this series. Once you start talking to writers and you find the community, especially within a small state like Oklahoma, you kind of find where you belong. So did it take reading that work in that setting at Scissortail that 1 year to kind of make you feel like perhaps you found your footing as a poet, or that you found your voice?
I had no idea how anyone would respond to these poems. I think there were a few of them that had been accepted in journals somewhere, but I had no public presentation of my poetry until that day. And the response was extraordinary and very encouraging. So I was as surprised as anyone. It's like, because people came up to me afterwards and said, I knew you wrote fiction, but I didn't know you wrote poetry. So it was kind of a revelatory moment.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Yeah, I bet. And there's just something about, and I think this is more so with poetry than fiction because it's longer, and it's just different when it's spoken. But did you feel like maybe a difference in your work, or what did you feel when you were reading it? Or I guess another way to put that question is, what does the reading of poetry and the gathering of people maybe do for the art?
I think there's a little performance to it,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that it's a communal event. I think that's probably, it's like watching a movie at home by yourself or watching a movie in the theater. It's got it's certainly been even rarer over the past year, but it's that sense of camaraderie. It's that you can feel it. People in the audience are rooting for you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they want to have the opportunity to show how much they appreciate what you do. And I feel the same way when I'm sitting and listening to someone else read. I don't care how long you've been writing. That environment, I think, is that's the motivation to get up and read and share your work and have a room full of usually writers as well, to appreciate it. So,
yeah, it's a very supportive event. I think it's real different from other, I think, conferences or
it's not a conference thing
or whatever readings. Yeah, it's a reading festival.
It is
reading festival, which is, I think, pretty unique. You know, there's no workshops, no one's promoting anything. It's just purely everyone gets the same amount of time. Everyone has a slot. You can't go over, or Ken will. He'll get you.
You better be pretty.
You better be on time.
I always tell him. He always said, 15 minutes, and I always promise him I can do this in 12. So,
it's good to have that cushion just in case. So you don't get kicked out of the festival the next time. So you've mentioned your first collection, and that was the Lone Cautious Animal Life, right? 2016. And then you have your latest collection, Occasional Hymns, published in 2018. So I'm wondering, when you consider those two books, it seems like the poets I talk to usually have that one poem that just either just took them forever to get right, and they kind of agonized over the drafts, and then they had that, a poem or two that just kind of came to them almost fully formed. Did you have experiences like that with your book, or do you handle that differently?
I don't know if I can recall the poems that took longer to write, or difficult to write, than the more spontaneous ones. I think part of it is until they're, even after they're in print, but certainly until they're in print, I'm always working. Always revising. So all of them seem to have taken a really long time to get done. But I think what typically happens is a line or a stanza will tend to come fairly quickly. And then it's just working out the rest of the poem and trying to find that ending.
Right.
To stop them. So I wouldn't call it work, but it does. I don't know that I have too many poems that are just spontaneously appearing.
Yeah, that seems to be just, maybe not every collection, but maybe once or twice, but for the most part, it is a lot of work. So how do you know, just maybe within yourself, when a poem that you've written you're like, okay, this is done?
I don't know if I do, because my experience has been some of the poems that I really thought were good, when I sent them on to trusted readers, they think, and I had poems that I thought, who cares, who have said, I really like that poem.
Yeah.
So it's, I guess I think you can admire your own work to a certain point,
Mm-hmm.
but and of course different readers respond differently. So it's I don't think I ever there are certainly poems that I think I've written very well, but they may not be the poems that readers necessarily find the most engaging. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and it could be subject matter. I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of the magic in it though too, and maybe it's kind of a scary process as well. You know, you write it down, it is what you think it is, and then once you hand it over to readers, it's
like,
going to, you know, it's going to take on a different kind of its own life, which is the kind of thrilling but also terrifying part of publishing.
Sometimes you just take what they say and you don't make any changes. Other times I've completely overhauled the work, and other times I've just abandoned it. It's a very dynamic process.
Right. So. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you have to trust your own self, which I think can be kind of hard to, or maybe for some, to.
I think you have to be your harshest critic, but sometimes good readers will remind you that you're not a harsh enough critic.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just no matter what you're writing, that's the way things go.
Yeah. Or in workshop settings,
Absolutely.
you get a lot of feedback, and you may have, two people in the workshop that hate and love the same line, or, something like that. So when you're making those decisions on how much do you listen to that kind of feedback? And I'm also kind of thinking of maybe young writers who might be in a workshop class and feel too influenced by what everyone else is maybe saying.
I think once I finished writing a poem, then I think I've always been pretty good about backing up and reading it as a reader. I read my poems out loud myself all the time. I'm very tuned into sounds and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I think it's that ability to separate yourself from the work and not be too proud, not think that you've just laid the golden egg or something like that. Maybe just a goose egg. So it's just, and sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes you may love a poem, and then 6 weeks later you think, oh my goodness, I can't believe I wrote this nonsense. And then you may write something that you just don't think works, and 6 weeks later you feel like a genius. So it's just, like I said, just as although poems may be set down, we all change over time, and we see them differently. So we become almost a different audience to our own work depending on when we read something. So again, it's an ongoing, very dynamic process.
Yeah. So when you're drafting, do you like to write with like pen and paper, pencil, and do you actually write things down in the early process, or do you draft on the computer, or does it depend? I'm always kind of curious about that.
I have lots of notebooks that have 50 different versions of a poem. But I've actually started writing a lot on my phone. Just because of the convenience of it, at least a couple of usually what I'll do is I'll write a first draft, not a first draft, but maybe a draft and a couple of revisions, and then I'll email it to myself, and then I'll cut and paste it and put it in my just working documents, and then kind of go from there. So I think for me, if I never get past the phone to send it to my own email, then I know that it's no good. So, but that's the process. I mean, and it seems to work just as well, to be honest, for me, than scribbling things. And my handwriting has gotten worse over the years, so sometimes I can't read my own handwriting.
Typing it out, that definitely kind of puts it all in one spot. So we were talking before we started recording about your latest collection, Occasional Hymns, and we were talking about how nature is a theme in that, and I was just saying, in this series, talking to writers about Oklahoma, the weather comes up. And maybe this isn't even your favorite poem, but I just love it. I think it's fun. It's fun. An Oklahoma weather poem that makes no mention of tornadoes. Do you mind?
Sure. I haven't read this in a while, so it's kind of new to me as well. So.
Yeah.
I just preface this by saying I try in collections of works to try to balance a little lightheartedness with the heavier stuff. So this was meant to be a little.
Yeah, and I think there's plenty in the collection, and if there's a different one you want to talk about next that's maybe a little heavier,
a little darker,
to show,
I can find one of those,
to show the contrast. But yeah, I think that's part of what makes collections, I think, just personally to me, interesting is a little lightheartedness. You need the light with the dark too, right?
Yeah. And I've got a couple of poems in here that are meant to be humorous to try to balance them out. So this was one I don't remember writing this, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
An Oklahoma weather poem that makes no mention of tornadoes, except in the title. I like to say.
Right.
In the rural wilds, the wind drives life away by the fistful, by the dustful, by the leafful. We are graveled and wind-groomed, cow-blustered, horse-dusted. Know that our limbs bend, manes twist, dirt mangles. Know that the air weaves and unravels, makes porch pots shadow. The bob and wheel of air moves us, lifts us, rhythms us, rhymes us. Who could live in stillness, plainless, sweetless, without the bloom of a dirty sun, the angled stab in February, or the hot bent flame of June?
Very good. So I've got that on the books now. But that one, is there anything else from this collection or another one that?
Well, I can read a heavier one.
Okay.
And I would go with the first one that I wrote. And when I wrote this book, this one was written with more intentionality, I think, than the first one.
Mm-hmm.
So, and one of the reasons I called it occasional hymns is that a lot of my poetry, a lot of my fiction as well, but a lot of my poetry is really informed by religious upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was a deacon in the Baptist church for 60 years or something like that.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
But the first poem in the collection titled By and By. And the byline dedicates this to Sanford Fillmore Bennett and Joseph E. Webster. Those are the two who wrote that particular hymn. So, By and By. When I was a child, how I loved the hymn, the sweet by and by, although I had no idea what it meant exactly. Only that we sang those sweet words on Sunday mornings and sang about that beautiful shore where all hope to meet again someday. Later, when my father was very old, he told me of a fine saddle horse he was forced to sell to the lumber company because he was a young man too poor to keep up the pretense of horse ownership. And then he told me a horse that goes deep into the pines to pull logs never comes out again. It was the closest he ever came to weeping over an animal, he said. And in the round darkness of his eyes, in the tragic mask of his long expression, the by and by rose up, and I saw that horse straining against the leather harness and heard those singing chains.
Beautiful.
A little darker. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a collection of poems, and you have to have so many to make a whole.
Hymns are often a little bit hopeful and dark at the same time.
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. Or like the hymns or the Psalms. You can definitely find all of that. I think as well. So how do you think you've grown as a poet, maybe comparing your first collection to to your second and just that whole process of putting it together. You mentioned having more intention with the second book, which, that can happen.
Well, I keep writing poems that have horses in them. I know that.
Yeah.
Quite a few
Yeah.
poems. I have a new collection as well I'm working on. It's got horse poems in it.
Okay.
I think writing with greater intentionality. I don't know if it's, I do think a little bit more about how does a particular poem tie into whatever I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think the second collection and the third one that I'm working on now is just has more of an intentionality than the first one. But I do think I have some themes and maybe a voice. I guess over time, sometimes you start to pigeonhole yourself if you aren't too careful. But
right.
I mean, I think I've found in some sense my voice of place. And my own upbringing, and I think a lot of those timelines are starting to come together in the poetry that I write. My interest, I always love to write about animals and outside and rural settings and those sorts of things. So I think the themes, and I don't know how intentional this is. I think it's just what I starts to kind of congeal at something. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's all coming from the subconscious, right? Too. I mean, we don't know what the themes are, and that's more of an editing thing.
Absolutely.
In a way, when you're putting the book together and deciding how you want to organize it and kind of lay it out.
Comes after most of the time for me. Yeah, I have a difficult time writing to a theme.
Yeah,
I think like you said, in the editing process and the arrangement, very often a theme will emerge through those various. It's like putting the puzzle pieces together. Eventually, a picture starts to emerge. It may have some gaps in it and missing a few pieces, but still, some pattern emerges.
And it's more analytical, I think, of a process, and poetry is different.
Yeah.
Our reasons for wanting to come back to a particular poem and work on it until we feel good about it, and just going through that whole effort. I think has to speak to something bigger than a particular theme. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your press, Turning Plow Press. How'd you get started with that?
Well, I think I have a hard time sticking to one passion at a time. So I think having sat in and listened to poets at Scissortail and at Shikaska and Tonkawa and a number of other venues, I became more and more impressed by the talent. And I know how hard it is to get published. It's incredibly difficult to get published. The short fiction market has certainly gotten better than it was 20 years ago. Poetry is still very, very difficult. There's lots of contests. People enter, $35 entry fees. You're one of 10,000 or something like that. And I just thought I could help promote regional writers. It would be a challenge for me to work on reading and editing and designing and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of it's it was just a new challenge, but I also really felt that we need another regional press, someone who's willing to consider those first books or second books or third books, out of this pool of writers that we have in this general region, particularly Oklahoma writers.
Oh yeah, tremendous talent here. But like you were saying, getting your book published by a press, I mean, especially with poetry, and it's competitive, and it's really hard to get in. And there's plenty of voices that are worthy of being heard or just discovering, through things like that. And you've got a few authors I think I've either interviewed or will interview, so it just kind of goes back.
I picked some good ones, I tell you. It's early on as you are. We've got some more good ones coming, but I think so far so good.
Yeah. And with the cover art on the books, I was just looking through your press's website. It's really beautiful. I think Stephen Schroeder, is he one
Uh,
of the artists or
well, Steve Schrader's the one
Schrader?
who does if I get him, and I haven't had that many manuscripts, but one of the first things I've done when I've gotten a manuscript from someone else is I go to Steve Schrader's art page with the notion of this book in mind. And his art is so varied and so remarkable that I kind of know it when I see it. And I think that's the one. And then I send to the writer and they say, man, that's fantastic. So I lean on Steve a lot. His artwork was on the cover of my first collection, as a matter of fact. And he's such a good guy and always glad to help out. And anyway, that's where I've been, with the exception of occasional hymns. That was a design from a book designer.
Yeah, a different design. Yeah, and choosing the cover and the art and just the look of the book and to make it all fit. That's kind of a process.
Yeah, it's the fun part. I think it's the really fun part.
Yeah,
I really enjoy that.
Yeah. So you're going to keep that going. Yeah. Has it been challenging in the pandemic, or do you feel like you haven't really slowed down that much?
Actually, I probably have more to do than I possibly can do.
Oh, wow.
My intention, honestly, was to try to do one book a year. Well, I'll probably have 2 out this year.
Yeah.
I would expect probably another couple next year, but I'm trying not to get a backlog early on. It's pretty easy to do. So, but I've got 2 more. There'll be 2 more coming out this year.
Okay.
So maybe 2 a year. Maybe that's what.
2 a year. Yeah. That keeps you busy. How long does one book take to get to press?
It depends on the book. If they're more complicated in terms of formatting, they tend to take longer. Bob Dean's book, The Aerialist Will Not Be Performing, was a Kansas writer who did just a marvelous book of ekphrastic poetry on Steve Schrader's art. It's a pretty good sized book. But that took a while. Just the design aspect was very challenging. Don Stenson's book, which was recently nominated as a finalist for the Book of Work Poetry. No images, everything was formatted. The poems are relatively short, and that we probably turned that one around in a couple of months. But
okay.
I mean, it takes the next one I have coming out by Marion Hurt, called Once Upon Tar Creek. Is a mixed genre book. It's poetry and prose and photographs and all this. So it's fairly complicated. So we're pushing. It hasn't been quite a year since I first got the manuscript, but I think we're getting pretty close. So it just depends on the book. Some are easy to read.
Yeah, I bet. So this is kind of on a different topic, but I'm curious now, when you think about all of the work you've done with your fiction, with your poetry, maybe with your press, what do you think your body of work or your contributions to the literary community, what do you think it represents? Or
I think as far as the press goes, it's just being supportive of the community and making sure that Oklahoma, as much as I can contribute to it, has a vibrant collection of work, body of work. I think for however long I run the press, that's always going to be my aim. I want to be proud of what we put out and just solidify that community and just show the talent that we have. As far as my own work, I think I don't know how to describe it. I think part of what I'm trying to do is to put together that sort of rural setting, but to create poems that have a real complexity to it. That's what I guess I don't think I can sum up my own work very well.
Yeah, well, that's kind of
a better idea of what I'm going to do with the press than I do.
Yeah, that's kind of asking you to be your own literary critic, which no writer does. We don't really do that, but I think it's always kind of interesting to to kind of think about kind of a retrospective.
I mean, I'm still that
sort of
kid that
thing.
went fishing on the river.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
I'm just
but
thinking,
but I earned
of
it, you know, but I'd sit in an office with, you know, diplomas with it,
that. Right.
you know, and that's
Yeah.
kind of the way my life goes. I have a very, in some ways, a very simple, rural, you know, raised missionary Baptist church, that sort of thing. But then through the process of education and all that kind of stuff. And so I have a wide range of influences at work in my life. And I think as much as anything, like I said, I'm trying to draw those elements and influences together into my poetry.
Yeah. And just taking from your experiences in your life, and maybe things that are perceived maybe on the surface as simple, but making it complex, like you said, and turning it into art, you know.
Some of it's a celebration of those rural, and I don't think I romanticize. I think just the opposite.
Right.
I think I can be very clear-eyed about rural Oklahoma sometimes. There's for all the complaints I may have about political views that people may hold around me, I still see really good, decent people. And I think so. I think my work is full of all kinds of contradictions like that.
Yeah,
because I feel them very much in my own life. Where I come from and where I am, and now it's just the point in my life I'm trying to draw them all together and see what happens.
And that's definitely something that's come up throughout this project, is just considering Oklahoma as a place and its contradictions.
Yeah. It's marvelous and concerning at the same time.
I think it's a unique place to describe. Or even, do you ever feel like you're just trying to in a way you're interpreting this place?
Yeah, exactly.
To others.
I mean, even the name of my press, Turning Plow Press. I mean, you know, I've got that needing to evoke that landscape, rural landscape, in so much of what I do. I did the same thing in my short story, drawing on family members. I mean, part of this is that the deep roots of my family lies with agriculture. I mean, my parents grew up as sharecroppers, you know, and that contrast to me is extraordinary. You know, I have images of my mother with picking cotton,
right?
You know, and then here I sit, you know, having done more than 25 years as a college professor. It's quite a contrast to try to negotiate, but I still hang on to that tradition and try to bring it into maybe a larger frame, an artistic frame.
Yeah, kind of bringing that to life through what you write too. Well, that's great. Glad we had a chance to talk about that. We've talked a little bit about your creative process. You had mentioned that you type it out, and if the poem is going to make it to the next rounds with you, you'll email it to yourself. Could you tell me a little bit more about your writing process? I'm thinking just from first draft to final draft, which we touched on that a little bit, but
I'm fairly undisciplined, to be honest. So I can work a little bit and then not do anything for a long time. But I mean, to me, I guess the process is just tinkering and trying and reading and sending it out to readers, and it's actually pretty involved when you think about what the product is going to be like. Less than half a page sometimes, but so the process is just, it really isn't just sort of finding a basic shape, finding a basic form, a voice, presentation, title, that kind of stuff, and then testing the waters with some trusted readers, and so it's going from private to public and then back to working on it. I think that's probably the process that I found to be most beneficial. Sometimes the most disheartening,
Right. Yeah.
So, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
It's
Well, it does require, and good writing doesn't happen alone.
Oh,
There's that, and I think maybe that's a misconception that perhaps young writers, or maybe kind of in my own experiences, what I've noticed is that, the masterpiece happens.
you're never writing for yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the main thing to remember.
Right.
Don't pretend like you're writing for yourself. If you're writing a diary, something like that. But if you're writing fiction or poetry or creative nonfiction, you're writing for an audience. You just have to admit it and find it. It's,
Yeah.
it's important.
So when you're writing, do you have to have a certain environment? Like, do you have to have silence, or are you just kind of on the go, type it up, or does it kind
No,
of
actually,
depend?
the funny thing is I've talked to a lot of writers that, one of the great things about this profession is that if you choose not to teach in the summer, you actually can have long gaps of time. And we all go in thinking, oh my goodness, the last essay's been graded, the last test. Now you're going to spend this whole glorious summer producing marvelous literature. And usually by the time we start the semester again in August, everyone's going, I didn't get anything.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that anticipation of Christmas morning. And it turns out, Christmas Day is never as nice as you think it's going to be, that kind of
Right.
stuff. So I think I actually probably write more during the semester because I have to force myself to find a little bit of time to do it. So I write in all kinds of different environments. I have a desk in a living area that I can look out of my window and across the dirt road, and there's wheat fields, and cows and that kind of stuff. And that's kind of nice, but I can also sit in my chair and watch, a cooking show on TV and type on my phone. So
Yeah.
It's fairly spontaneous. It's not, like I said, I'm not disciplined at all. I don't know how I managed to get anything done.
And all writers handle it differently, or if you just kind of read up on people's writing rituals, if they have any. Some people are very specific, down to the word count per day they want to have to have a certain desk and everything, just so.
Yeah, I think it's funny. When I think of that kind of writer, I always think about Ernest Hemingway. That was Hemingway's.
Right.
He may have been drunk a lot, but when he was writing, he was the stone cold sober.
Yeah,
work
that
for a
desk
certain amount of time.
5 a.m. getting it done.
I've tried that, and it isn't that I don't get work done, but I think that the funny thing about writing for me is that I don't want it to be work. I don't want it to be a scheduled thing. When I was a kid, I come from a fairly musical family. My dad used to play in a bluegrass band back in the 50s with all his brothers. And he played the banjo. And so there are lots of instruments around. And I picked up the guitar and started, kind of teaching myself chords and that sort of thing. And he asked me one time, he said, would you like to have guitar lessons? And I thought about it. I thought, no, because then it's just going to be a chore. So for me, I think that the same thing works with writing. I really like that. I mean, sometimes I do think I got to sit down and got to write something, but I don't beat myself up if I don't find a schedule. I think writing to me is as much as anything as a way to escape from the schedule.
Yeah, that's a good.
That's why it takes me 3 or 4 years to get a book.
So, well, you get it done.
It's been almost 3 years since the last one. So.
Yeah. So I like to ask people, what's the best writing advice you've ever been given? And then what would you offer to, let's say, aspiring writers?
I would have to, I don't know if this is actually advice, as much as an approach to talk about Gordon Weaver again. I think one of the things that Gordon Weaver taught me more than anything else is that you have to approach this, if you want to be good at it, with some understanding about what makes a poem work, what makes a short story work, what makes fiction work. You kind of need to know the parts, narrator, voice, those. You have to sort of know the basic parts of what you're trying to do. I don't think it's all spontaneous. And what that amounts to is developing writing as a kind of craft approach. And if you craft it well, what you hope is that some something artistic, less definable comes out of it. So I think it's learn your craft. I mean, this goes all the way back to Yeats, poets learn your trade, right?
Yes.
So that's and again, that's why you need to read, not only read fiction, if you're going to write fiction, read fiction, but understand why a story works. What is it that makes James Joyce's The Dead, which I think is probably one of the most magnificent short stories. Not everyone will agree with me, but just as far as the construction of that narrative is remarkable. So that when you get to the ending of it, you can't imagine that story being written any other way. So it's learning the craft by enjoying stories, but understanding what makes good short stories work, what makes a good poem work. So it's a craft, it's a skill that you hope elevates to. Once you get that, it becomes something beyond just craft and skill.
What words of encouragement would you give to young writers in Oklahoma who maybe think this isn't a place where to write, like this isn't a place for art worthy
if
of
only
art?
We could all go to Paris and that kind of. It's funny. I had an opportunity to go to answer your question along that way, to go on a study abroad program with students here, and I ended up at University College Dublin teaching creative writing to the students from Oklahoma for about 2 weeks. Well, we got to travel around other places as well. I have a brother-in-law who lives in Germany, and went to France and that sort of stuff. And when I got back, I realized I hadn't written a single thing. And to this day, I've not written a single thing about that exotic experience.
Oh, you're good.
I unplugged myself. Can you still hear me?
I do that too.
So,
so I have this
I start talking
behind me.
I start talking with my hands.
I know. I do. I do too. I've been holding on to my earbuds.
That sort of romance and romantic notion about what it means to be a writer and where you have to go. And I think that, I didn't intentionally not write about those experiences, but I realized it wasn't that there's nothing, and I knew this before I went over it, but I think you always have to write out of where you are. Those are the deeper experiences, whether you like them or not. And I've looking back over my own career, such as it is, I never thought, I never questioned why I wanted to write. I just did. And the old adage of writer's right. And I remember when I was at Tulsa Junior College, and I had a humanities teacher. Do you know Jules Emig? Does that mean Jules Emig?
I know, yeah.
Jules Emig was lived in Tulsa, and he actually hitched a ride with me to Stillwater on occasion, because he ended up, I think he was an undergraduate advisor there for years and years and years. But Jules Emig was my humanities teacher, and at the beginning of the class, he went around the room and says, "What do you want to do?" And this is probably the first time I ever said this out loud. I said, "I want to be a writer." And Jules said, "I hear that all the time, and no one ever does it." And then he goes on to the next person. And I always remembered that, and I don't mean I'm writing as a, revenge against Jules Emig, but sometimes those discouraging moments, it's like, oh yeah, we'll just sit back and watch, that kind of thing. So I think that, I think if you're going to write, you'll write. I don't think you can worry about where you are or who you are or what you think you are. You just got to do it, and it'll come.
Yeah. I think that's great advice, or great words of encouragement. Do it. You don't need special permission from anyone.
Don't wait for the perfect opportunity. You don't have to set up the perfect desks. Like I said, I write all on my phone, watching TV, and all kinds of occasions. Sitting at a stoplight, something will come out, scribble down a line or something like that. I think if you're a writer, you think about it all the time. But you also have to do it.
Yes, sure. So you mentioned that you were working on your third poetry collection. Is that right?
Yeah.
What do you want to say about that? Is there anything else that you're working on as well that you wanted to talk about?
Well, the poetry collection is called 10 Acres of the Universe. That's my working title. And it's actually organized in a fairly conventional way. It's organized by season. Spring, summer, fall.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's got a lot of the stuff, focal points I have in the other poems. I think the first poem is, I can't remember the title of it. It's actually with farmers plowing their fields in spring.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's what I'm working on now. And I think I'm hoping maybe to be done with it early this year.
Yeah. So how have you kept inspired during the pandemic? And did you spend most of your work teaching remotely?
Only when
this last year?
Last spring, when we shut down in March.
Okay.
Then last spring, when we shut down in March.
Yeah.
I taught from the dining room table. But this semester and last semester, as a matter of fact, we were on campus. Now, students had the option of, for instance, I teach an ancient arts and culture class, a humanities class. So some students would be just exclusively on Zoom and others would be in the classroom. So, and the same thing happened this semester, but the past semester, so it's been a mix of both, but I haven't just taught at home since last March, April.
Oh, okay. And poetry readings you attend, I know they're all mostly
what I've seen on Zoom.
Online.
I've watched a few, and one of the things I've always wanted to go to the Dodge Poetry Festival, and one of these days I'm going to make it there, and that was all online this year as well, and that was really really nice. So, but it's not the same,
Right. Yeah.
It's not the same thing. So I'm looking forward to some live events.
Yes.
Coming up soon.
Yeah, me too.
Because it's not just the reading, it's the the dinners afterwards with people and that kind of stuff. That's part of the whole thing. So
one of those conversations you may have in the hallway or on the way to dinner or those.
So I don't feel, honestly, I don't feel like I've suffered much during this pandemic. So I mean,
well, that's good.
I'm fairly comfortable with technology. I know I knock my computer around a lot.
Oh, that's okay. It's the headphones that we have to have on these things. I do it too. That's just part of
it hasn't been that difficult for me.
Good. Yeah, well, that's definitely good and encouraging to hear. So was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Well, I'll plug a couple of books here.
Okay, yeah, sure.
We do have, like I said, we had Bob Dean's book, Don Stinson's book, and then more recently Hank Jones.
Yes.
His new book, and Marianne Hurt's book is coming out on Tar Creek. This is a very interesting book. I think it's going to be a very important book. Tar Creek, I just heard on the news the other day that Tar Creek is still one of the most polluted waterways in the country. Yeah. And Marianne in this sort of traces the whole history of that up to the time when the town of Pitcher was essentially closed because of the pollution. So we've got that coming out. Julie Chappell's collection of poetry is coming out as I pirouette away. And so I'm excited about those books. I think they're going to be, I think the press is going to have a very strong representation at the festivals as they open up. So that's what I'm looking forward to hearing them read from their collection. So
yeah, well, maybe next spring at Scissortail, I'll be able to catch a few of those readings, and hopefully authors from your press will be there
Oh, they'll be there.
Yeah.
They'll be there. They're all very active in the
Yes.
community here. That's the nice
Oh,
thing
yeah.
as well. So everybody's going to celebrate, I think, when
Yes.
they stand up at the podium and read from those books. And
Yeah.
I'm very proud of them, and they've all just been terrific people to work with. Just it's been a real pleasure working with them. I hope to continue that for a while.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I thank you so much for your time,
You're more than welcome.
Paul, today. This has been great.
It's very, very enjoyable.
Yeah.